Yeah, kind of breaking news. Squirrel White, Tennessee wide receiver
Yep.
transfer, just committed, just announced his intentions to transfer to Florida State. I haven't seen the official Florida State tweet yet, just because I haven't been on my phone for this. But Florida State picks up a pretty big get in at wide receiver, and something they desperately need. 1,600 career yards, 6 touchdowns, 131 receptions. He's got a year of eligibility left. Squirrel White, 5'10", 167. Tennessee fans weren't thrilled about losing him. Pretty solid speed. Hands plus for sure. I wouldn't say like catches absolutely everything. I feel like in college it's pretty rare to find that guy anyway. There is one guy up at Ohio State that does catch everything, but a pretty good pickup here for Mike Norvell and the Seminoles, as they certainly have revamped that offensive line room. The defense, the front seven, we've seen linebackers and offensive linemen, defensive linemen, all of that as well. But they desperately need the wide receiver room to be better. And I think this is a pretty positive addition for Mike Norvell and staff.
Yeah, definitely. Just looking at his profile here on 247, he was the number 102 overall rated transfer prospect this year. And that might sound like not great, but at the same time, there's over 2,000 to 3,000 players in the portal every single year. So you got like one of the best receivers that was in the portal. And when you look at the schools he was, considering, I think it's a huge pickup. He's not a wide receiver one, but at the same time, he's one of those guys. I think he can really fill like that Ja'Kai Douglas type role that we had last year, where you look for him on certain plays, you dial up plays for him. I think it's a really good pickup, and to your point, TJ, Tennessee fans were not happy to see him go. It's kind of like us, when most of the players that leave Florida State, you're like, oh, okay, no big deal. But there's every once in a while, like a Malik McLean, who had a big play in the bowl game this year, for Arizona State. Those are the ones that you're like, dang, I wish they hadn't gone. And this is one of those guys for Tennessee. And Tennessee is a top 15 program right now in the country. They are rolling. So I'm pretty happy with this pickup.
Yeah, didn't his production was a little bit down last year. This year, Tennessee's offense also just wasn't amazing by any means. But the year before led them in yards and receptions. 131 receptions. I'm sorry, that was his total. But a year before led them in receptions. 67 receptions. He was certainly their go-to guy. 100 or 800 plus yards. Yeah, he was really good for them. And like you said, whether he ends up being in the slot or wherever at 5'10", you wouldn't be shocked if that's kind of where he plays mostly. Again, a huge pickup for the Noles. Very explosive. Certainly a guy that can kind of take a ball deep if needed. And you certainly don't hate that. Oregon in the mix. Oregon, to me, has probably the second best wide receiver room in the country behind Ohio State. And you know that they're not, targeting just absolute slouches. So you needed that one, and you ended up getting it. We'll go backwards now.
And an all-time name. Like
Squirrel is fun.
Yeah.
You know what his best game was this year, Richie? Do you know without looking?
No.
It was the Florida game. So I'll take that too.
So, yeah, that's a bonus.
give me a guy that his best game this last year was against UF. Make sure you're betting with BetUS. A couple of games coming up this week. Obviously, the NFL playoffs, which if your team's not in that, I'm very sorry. YouTube 150 is the code to use. You get 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. With that, you also get 125% on your next 2 deposits, and then actually all of that is up to $2,000. So make sure you're betting with BetUS this year, next year, all the things. BetUS YouTube 150 is the code. Earlier in the week, we had talked about him a couple of times. Caleb Lavelli, a linebacker from North Carolina, 6'1", 225. He did have 8 tackles as a true freshman, played a ton in their bowl game, was probably their best player on defense in their bowl game. Didn't play a ton. I mean, he got into every game, but wasn't a huge piece of their defense for much of the year. Obviously, as a true freshman, it takes a little time to get in. But a big kid, 6'1", 225, that Florida State is really, really excited about his upside. Somebody that I think that Florida State kind of knew they wanted to target if he would jump into the portal. He did hours after their bowl game. And I think this one was all FSU from the start. He obviously committed earlier in the week. We're not breaking any news with that one, but that linebacker room has to get flipped. And so a big pickup for Florida State to continue on with Lavelli, their first commitment of this week since the last time we chatted with you guys. Their linebacker room has to get better, and excited about having Lavelli part of the program as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure he'll be an instant impact player in it next year, but he's definitely someone who would, the coaching staff, they're not going to hit the portal to take guys that they think would not be impactful in the near future over high school players who might be considered projects, right? So while I think a transfer project is more impactful than a high school project, and I think they saw enough on film. The production wasn't a ton, obviously, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you, he's the next Luke Kuechly, but he definitely has the frame, has the size, has the ability, and the new staff I think really wanted him. They made him a priority, and I think that's a good pickup for Florida State. So I'm okay with it. I do not expect him to be an impact player in 2025. I hope I'm wrong, but I do think he's a guy that the staff thinks can be an impact player in 2026 and moving on.
Not their only linebacker commit. They also landed Elijah Herring today, Memphis transfer. So he's used to winning in Doak. Subtle jab that hurt a little bit. A little bit bigger. 6'2", 230, his fourth year. He does have 2 years of eligibility left. 1,400 snaps. He had a 69 PFF grade. He had a really good run grade. He had 7.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Did have a couple of picks, a couple of forced fumbles. Very productive at Memphis. And this is kind of what Florida State has done over the last couple of years. When they were having success in the portal, they went and grabbed guys that had production at maybe a smaller school and saw that production translate with pretty good coaching. Like, as much as we give Randy Shannon and the defensive staff crap that was nearly all replaced, the coaching I think was always fairly good. The development of guys when they had pretty good clay was pretty good. And so not the only linebacker pickup. Florida State has completely flipped that room. Obviously, Omar Graham's still there. Juice Cry, like, there are still guys there, but has picked up a lot. And you've gotten 2 linebacker commits today. And like I said, certainly got a guy that had production at Memphis. How well does that translate to Florida State? I don't know. That's mostly on him. That's mostly on how our staff can kind of coach him. But I think he'll probably make I would say he probably makes a bigger impact faster, just with his experience, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, I enjoy the pickup because it's a room you need to revamp, and it's quite frankly a room you just got to throw bodies at this point, which, you never want to be in that situation. You want to recruit well enough at the high school level or even in the transfer portal of multi-year players to where you're not just trying to throw bodies at a position. But I think that's kind of where we are. But I think, he's a guy that can come in, and I do think he is a guy that could make an impact next year and win a starting job. I think he's, someone that you can trust to at least be very solid. He can be like a DJ Lundy type. He's not going to be an all ACC, all American type player, but at the same time, he's not going to be a negative plus player.
I'm gonna clip this for him when just that part where you said he's not going to be an all ACC type player. I'm gonna clip this for him so that he ends up being this year. And then a couple more pickups. We'll talk about both these, then we'll move on a little bit. Diamante Diggs, defensive end from Coastal Carolina, 6'5", 260, had 18 tackles, 5 sacks. I thought it was interesting that when Florida State announced him on their Twitter, they put an edge that can actually get. They didn't put actually. Okay, let me edit that before I get in trouble. An edge that can get to the quarterback. I don't think they meant that as a shot, but I'm going to take it as a shot. I seriously don't think Florida State, they're just trying to hype up their new ad. But we didn't do a very good job of getting to the quarterback from the defensive end position. I know that MJJ had a couple against Cal. I know that Pat had a few through the year, but I'm going to take it as a shot. So Diamante Diggs from Coastal Carolina, again, a program that you're grabbing somebody, hoping that talent and that production can translate to this little bit higher level. And then Jason Jenkins, we talked about him a ton. Defensive lineman, probably going to play the edge position, 6'6", 281, 3 tackles, 2 sacks on the year. Not a ton of production, had more the year before, but I think they like his talent, his upside. And I'm with you on this too. Like you mentioned this for the linebacker room. This is a room they have to throw bodies at as well. Like they have to get it right here. And not a ton of production coming from Tennessee. If we're being very frank, I spoke with some people at Tennessee. I've said this on a couple of shows now. Spoke with a couple of people at Tennessee and was kind of told, man, he was just on a loaded defensive line, a top 10 defensive line in the country, and just got passed up by much better players. So I think there's some talent there. We'll see how it translates, but not a bad player. Certainly not somebody that just got passed up on the depth chart because they weren't very good, passed up because they recruited the D-line really, really well, and they had a really good one this year. And so, again, we'll see how that translates, see how he plays under Knighton. Odell's still there coaching as well. I know that he's kind of in a different kind of role, but you can utilize him as well. So excited to see what both those defensive linemen can do. It does seem like a lot of their pickups have been really good run stoppers. Florida State obviously didn't stop the run worth a damn this year. And so you'd hope that improves with the style of play that they have this year and with some of the bodies that they have gone and got. Although, like we said with Diggs, 5 sacks, Jason Jenkins with a couple of sacks, Williams that you picked up earlier from Nebraska, several sacks, and so I think they certainly like the pass rush aspect, but guys that can actually set the edge and not get beat around the corner a ton, which, I think Omari and Hampton's still running at this point. So defensive line picks up a couple as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good pickup as well. It's definitely worth a scholarship, right? And I think, we talked about this either last week or the week before that, when you get a player from Alabama or Georgia or whoever it may be, that's exciting, right? Like, oh, they were in the playoff last year. Well, why are they leaving a playoff team, right? There's a reason they're leaving a playoff team. But what about a Jared Verse, a Braden Fisk, Jarian Jones, the guys that are not leaving playoff teams or think they're upgrading by coming to Florida State? Those are the players you want. And not to say that you can't get a backup from Alabama. We saw it with the Georgia when we got Jermaine Johnson. Like that obviously worked out really, really well. And he's like you just mentioned about that current prospect, someone who was just lost in the depth chart and said, "Let me go somewhere else." Right.
Sure.
For the majority of Florida State transfers that have really panned out, nobody wanted Johnny Wilson from Arizona State. Nobody wanted Trey Benson from Oregon. Yes, Jared Verse was very coveted. I'll give you that. That was the case. But Florida State was the first on top of that. But I get more excited about these transfers from smaller schools because if you're leaving a top 5 program in the country, there's typically a reason that's not great why you're doing that. Jermaine Johnson, I think, might be the one exception.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, it's so hard. The eval period right now is so hard because it is so short, it is so compressed. You are pulling some guy, like you said, Lavelli, right? Had 8 total tackles. Well, you've got to trust your eval there. You've got to trust that what you saw in that limited action, and again, he played in all 13 games, so I don't want to call it limited action, but you've got to trust that what you're evaluating here is going to be worth it because we've seen Florida State be successful at every level, right? Pulling guys from other schools. They've done a good job, like a Jermaine Johnson, pulling guys from big time programs. They have had some success with that. And then pulling guys from a smaller level. They've had success there too, right? When you talk about Jared Verse, you talk about Braden Fisk coming from Albany and West Michigan. And then, I think you look at guys with no production or very limited production, like a Trey Benson or a Johnny Wood. Like they've really had success at all 3 levels. It seemed like last year they literally just went after guys, and I don't mean to rehash this a million times, but they literally just went after guys that were coming from big programs that had like no production at all. They just kind of relied on high school evaluations. And you do have to, I think, rely on that some, but that can't be all that you're doing. That can't be the only way that you're doing it. And so, I mean, I don't want to say it's like completely just a crapshoot, but it is a crapshoot to know, like, is a guy going to work out? Is a guy going to be what you think he is? Because who knows, right? Like guys can come in with a ton of production, a ton of snaps and be terrible, or guys can come in with nothing and be really good for you, like a Trey Benson, right? Who ends up being RB2 in the draft. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. And that's where, Florida State is having to kind of go all in on this because they've got to turn things around pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's kind of where we're at right now because Mike Norvell knows that I'm sorry. If he has another 3, 4, even 5-win season, I think he knows he probably doesn't survive that because the one thing about Florida State, we might be a frugal organization when it comes to the college football team, but we are not cheap. And he needs to produce this year. You cannot follow up a 2-win season with a season under 500 again, because if he does, I think he's gone. TJ, I don't know about you, but I truly think he is, and I think he thinks that as well, and that needs to be his mentality. That's what he needs to understand and think at the very least, even if he has another year beyond this. But yeah, I think he's going all in for this year, and I think he kind of got back to his roots of his early time recruiting the transfer portal with Florida State in saying, let me just trust my evaluations and trust the people around me to trust what they see. I think that's where we're at. And I think that's a good place to be in. Doesn't make, again, I'm not saying we're going to win 10 games next year, but I do think Norvell is thinking, okay, I made a mistake. I think the mistake he made last year, especially when it comes to the receiver room, is he was so enamored with speed. He's like, oh, we have all these super fast guys. Well, yeah, but can they run a route? Can they block? No, no, they clearly couldn't. And that was an issue. And I think this year he's like, let me just trust my personal evaluations and the people around me who I trust. And I think that could provide, some good things for Florida State next year. But we'll have to wait and see. But I do think he kind of got back to his roots a little bit this year in the transfer portal.